The chandelier cast its usual warm glow over my grandmother's mahogany dining table, the same one where 3 generations of Williamson family dinners had unfolded. Tonight felt different though. The air was thick with tension and barely concealed pity as my relatives passed around grandmother's famous pot roast. I sat in my usual spot, the chair that had been mine since childhood, wearing my simple black sweater and jeans while everyone else had dressed like they were attending a board meeting. I'm Sarah Williamson, though lately my family had taken to introducing me with apologetic disclaimers. This is our Sarah, she's going through a rough patch. At 28 I was the family disappointment who'd walked away from a promising legal career to pursue what they called unrealistic dreams. What they didn't know was that those dreams had built me an empire worth more than all their combined assets. Sarah, darling, my Aunt Patricia began, her voice dripping with the kind of concern that felt more like judgment. We're all here because we love you. She gestured around the table with her perfectly manicured hand, taking in my cousins Jennifer and Michael, my Uncle Robert, and my parents who sat looking appropriately worried. We can't stand by and watch you destroy your life any longer. I took a small sip of water, noting how my father avoided my eyes while my mother dabbed at hers with her linen napkin. The performance was impressive, though I wondered if any of them actually believed their own narrative about my supposed downfall. Living in your car, my cousin Jennifer shook her head sadly, sleeping in parking lots, showering at the gym. This isn't who you're supposed to be, Sarah. I almost smiled at that. If they only knew that my car was a custom Tesla I'd bought with cash, that my gym was an exclusive private club I'd joined under an assumed name to maintain my privacy, and that I chose to sleep in various locations because I owned properties across 3 states and enjoyed the flexibility. We've spoken to Harold Morrison, Uncle Robert announced, cutting into his roast with surgical precision. You remember Harold, don't you? Senior partner at Morrison, Blake & Associates. He's willing to give you another chance despite your departure from legal practice. Harold Morrison, the same man who'd tried to steal my research on corporate tax loopholes 3 years ago, then had me blacklisted when I refused to let him take credit. The same man who had no idea that his firm's biggest client, Meridian Holdings, was one of my shell companies. That's very generous of Harold, I replied quietly, watching as Michael nodded approvingly. My cousin had always been the golden child, following the prescribed path from Harvard Law to corporate partnership to marriage within the appropriate social circle. We've also found you a lovely apartment, my mother added, her voice trembling slightly. Nothing fancy but clean and safe. Patricia has agreed to co-sign the lease until you get back on your feet. I glanced at Aunt Patricia, who owned a chain of mid-level boutiques and considered herself the family's business expert. She'd been trying to expand into online retail for years, completely unaware that I'd been her main competitor, systematically outmaneuvering her at every turn through my e-commerce platform. The important thing, my father spoke for the first time that evening, is that we're here for you. No judgment, just family support. He looked around the table, gathering nods of agreement from everyone except me. This intervention approach, I said slowly, is this something you all planned together? We had to do something, Jennifer burst out. Seeing you like this, it's heartbreaking. You were valedictorian, for God's sake. You had everything going for you and now you're living like some kind of vagrant. The irony was almost too much to bear. While they sat in their modest suburban homes, making their 6-figure salaries and thinking they understood success, I had quietly become one of the wealthiest individuals in the state. My investment portfolio alone generated more in a month than most of them made in a year. We just want our old Sarah back, my mother whispered. The one with ambition, with goals. What if I told you, I said carefully, that I've never been more ambitious or goal-oriented than I am right now? Uncle Robert scoffed. Sarah, selling handmade jewelry at farmers markets isn't ambition. It's a hobby that got out of hand. The handmade jewelry. That was the cover story I'd been maintaining for 3 years while building my actual business empire. Let them think I was crafting bracelets when I was really crafting billion-dollar deals. We're staging an intervention, Aunt Patricia announced while passing the roast to my father, because Sarah's living in her car and clearly can't make rational decisions anymore. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID read Mayor's Office Direct Line. I glanced around the table at my family's expectant faces. They probably thought it was a bill collector or someone calling about my vagrant lifestyle. Excuse me, I said politely, I should take this. Before anyone could object, I put the call on speaker. Miss Williamson? The mayor's familiar voice filled the dining room. I hope I'm not interrupting your Sunday dinner. Not at all, Mayor Richardson, I replied, watching as eyebrows rose around the table. How can I help you? I'm calling to personally thank you for the $50 million donation to the new Children's Hospital wing. The board just approved the naming rights, and I wanted you to be the first to know that the Sarah Williamson Pediatric Center will break ground next month. The silence that followed was deafening. Every fork stopped halfway to mouths that hung open in shock. My father's wine glass trembled in his hand while my mother's face went completely white. That's wonderful news, Mayor, I said calmly. Please send my regards to the board. I'll be attending the groundbreaking ceremony, of course. Of course. And Miss Williamson, I hate to discuss business on a Sunday, but the City Council is very interested in your proposal for the downtown revitalization project. The preliminary numbers you submitted are impressive. A $2 billion investment would transform our entire metropolitan area. $2 billion. I watched as that number sank into my family's consciousness like stones dropping into still water. I'm looking forward to Tuesday's presentation, I replied. My team has prepared a comprehensive plan that should address all the council's concerns. Excellent. Oh, and congratulations on the Forbes recognition. America's most influential young philanthropist. Well deserved. Enjoy your family dinner, Miss Williamson. The line went dead. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds. Finally, Jennifer found her voice. $50 million, she whispered. I set my phone down and took another sip of water. The pediatric wing was important to me. Children's health care shouldn't depend on their family's ability to pay. But you're homeless, Michael stammered. You don't have any money. You're living in your car. Am I? I tilted my head slightly. Or is that just what you all assumed because I chose a different path than the one you prescribed for me? Uncle Robert was staring at his plate like it might contain answers. The mayor said Forbes magazine. America's most influential young philanthropist, I confirmed. The article comes out next week. They interviewed me about my foundation's work in education, healthcare, and urban development. Aunt Patricia had gone very pale. Your foundation? The Meridian Foundation. We've donated over $300 million in the past 2 years alone. I paused, letting that sink in. We focus on systemic change rather than band-aid solutions. My father finally found his voice. Sarah, I don't understand. If you have access to this kind of money, why are you living like what, Dad? Like someone who doesn't need a big house to prove their worth? Like someone who values experiences over possessions. I smiled gently. I have homes, plural. I just prefer to travel light. Homes, my mother echoed weakly. The penthouse downtown, the cabin in Colorado, the beach house in California, and a few others scattered around. I listed them matter-of-factly. Though I spend most of my time traveling for business. Hence the car situation you're all so concerned about. Jennifer was scrolling frantically on her phone. I can't find any Sarah Williamson associated with major philanthropic donations. Because I value privacy. Most of my donations are made through holding companies and trusts. I pulled out my own phone and opened a news app. Though the hospital donation is public record now. I turned the screen toward them. There it was, a headline from the local news website. Anonymous donor revealed. Local businesswoman Sarah Williamson pledges $50 million for Children's Hospital. This doesn't make sense, Michael said, shaking his head. 3 years ago you walked away from Morrison Blake with nothing. You said the legal profession was corrupt and you wanted to make a real difference. How did you go from that to this? I did exactly what I said I was going to do, I replied. I made a real difference. Just not in the way any of you expected. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking my grandmother's garden. The same garden where I'd played as a child, where I'd first developed my love for building things and watching them grow. Remember when I left Morrison Blake? I asked without turning around. Harold Morrison had just tried to steal credit for my work on the Technotron case. Work that saved their client $40 million in taxes. You were being dramatic, Uncle Robert muttered. That's how the legal profession works. Senior partners guide junior associates. Guide. I laughed softly. Is that what you call submitting my research under his name and offering me a footnote? I turned back to face them. I had a choice. Except that my ideas would always be stolen or take control of my own destiny. So you decided to make jewelry, Jennifer said sarcastically. No, Jennifer. I decided to build something bigger than any of you could imagine. I sat back down, opening my laptop which I'd brought in my bag. The jewelry story was, let's call it strategic misdirection. The screen displayed a complex web of companies, holdings, and investments. Meridian Holdings at the center, connected to dozens of subsidiaries spanning everything from technology to real estate to renewable energy. While you all thought I was selling handmade bracelets at farmers markets, I continued, I was actually building the largest privately held investment firm in the state. Meridian Holdings has assets of approximately $12 billion. The laptop clattered as my father knocked over his water glass, soaking the linen tablecloth. Nobody moved to clean it up. 12 billion, Aunt Patricia repeated numbly. Give or take a few hundred million. The market fluctuates. I closed the laptop. The interesting thing about being underestimated is how much people will tell you when they think you're not important enough to matter. I looked directly at Uncle Robert. Like when you mentioned that Harold Morrison was looking for new investment capital for his firm's expansion. Or when you complained about the city's slow approval process for development projects. His face was turning an interesting shade of red. You've been using family conversations for business intelligence? I've been listening to my family talk about business opportunities while assuming I was too much of a failure to understand or care. I shrugged. Your assumption, not mine. Michael was still staring at the laptop. But the car, the clothes, the carefully cultivated image of failure? Yes, that was intentional. I smoothed my simple sweater. Amazing how much more efficiently you can operate when no one sees you coming. My mother hadn't spoken since the mayor's call. She sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Finally, she whispered, Why didn't you tell us? Tell you what, Mom? That I was succeeding? When would have been a good time? During the lectures about responsibility? The interventions about my unrealistic dreams? The constant suggestions that I come crawling back to Harold Morrison? We were trying to help, my father protested. No, Dad. You were trying to control. There's a difference. I stood again, gathering my things. You couldn't accept that I might have my own vision of success, one that didn't fit your narrow definition of achievement. Where are you going? Jennifer asked. I checked my phone. I have a conference call with my Tokyo investors in 20 minutes. The car is actually perfect for international calls, excellent soundproofing and privacy. As I headed toward the door, Aunt Patricia called out, Sarah, wait. We made mistakes. We didn't understand. I paused, looking back at my family sitting around that familiar table. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by their own assumptions. The apartment you found for me, I said to my mother. What's the address? She fumbled for a piece of paper. 1247 Riverside Drive. It's a nice complex. Patricia knows the owner. I smiled. Patricia, you know the owner of Riverside Commons? Of course, my aunt replied, confusion clear in her voice. I've been trying to get a meeting with them for months about retail space in their new development. Well, I said, pulling out my car keys, next family dinner we should discuss that retail space. I'm sure we can work something out. I was almost to the door when understanding dawned on Patricia's face. You, she whispered. You own Riverside Commons. Among other things. I turned the doorknob. The apartment you picked out for me is actually quite lovely. I designed it myself when we were planning the complex. The silence that followed me out was different from the earlier tension. This was the silence of a world quietly reshaping itself, of assumptions crumbling and new realities taking their place. As I walked to my Tesla, not exactly living in my car in the way they'd imagined, my phone buzzed with the first of what I knew would be many messages. Apologies, explanations, requests for meetings and advice and investment opportunities. But for now, I had that conference call with Tokyo. Real business, real decisions, real impact on the world. The kind of life I'd always dreamed of building, brick by careful brick, while my family worried about the foundation. 3 months later, I sat in the same dining room for Sunday dinner. The atmosphere had changed considerably. My family had adjusted to their new reality with varying degrees of grace, and I'd adjusted to being seen rather than overlooked. The pediatric wing is beautiful, my mother said, passing the green beans. We drove by yesterday to see the progress. The opening ceremony is next month, I replied. You're all invited, of course. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. Sarah, I've been thinking about your offer to help with my investment portfolio. If you're still willing. I smiled. Of course, Uncle Robert. Though I should mention that my minimum investment is usually $50 million. For family, I suppose I could make an exception. His face went through several interesting color changes as he processed that his niece's minimum investment was larger than his total net worth. The jewelry business, Jennifer said carefully, that was all just cover? Not entirely. I actually enjoyed making the pieces. There's something meditative about creating beautiful things with your hands. I took a sip of wine. I still make jewelry sometimes just for relaxation. Relaxation from running a $12 billion empire, Michael added, shaking his head. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around it. Aunt Patricia had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout dinner. Finally, she spoke up. The retail space at Riverside Commons. Consider it yours, I said. Below market rate, of course. Family discount. But I haven't even submitted a business plan. Patricia, you've been talking about expanding online for 3 years. I've heard every detail of your plans during family dinners. They're solid. You just need the right space and some startup capital. She blinked rapidly and I realized she was fighting back tears. You're going to fund my expansion? I'm going to invest in your expansion. There's a difference. I believe in the potential, but I expect returns. My father had been quiet through most of dinner, but now he leaned forward. Sarah, I owe you an apology. A big one. Dad. No, let me say this. We spent 3 years worried about you, pitying you, trying to fix you. And the whole time you were building something extraordinary. We should have trusted you. We should have supported your dreams instead of trying to force you back into ours. The table fell silent. This was as close to emotional vulnerability as my father ever got. You did support me, I said quietly. Not in the way you intended, but you did. Every time you underestimated me, it made me more determined. Every time you suggested I was failing, it reminded me why I was building something different. Still, my mother added, we could have been part of your journey instead of obstacles to it. I looked around the table at these people who'd raised me, shaped me, and yes, underestimated me. But they were still my family. You're part of it now, I said. If you want to be. My phone buzzed and I glanced at the caller ID. Excuse me, this is important. I put the call on speaker again, just like that night 3 months ago. Miss Williamson, this is President Martinez from the university. I'm calling about your proposed donation for the new business school building. Of course, President Martinez. Did the board approve the curriculum changes I suggested? They did unanimously. The Sarah Williamson School of Social Enterprise will be the first program in the country to focus specifically on using business success for social impact. The $100 million endowment will fund full scholarships for students from underserved communities. Another number that made my family's eyes widen. But this time, instead of shock, I saw something else. Pride. Wonderful, I replied. I'll have my foundation's education team coordinate with your development office on the details. After ending the call, Jennifer was the first to speak. $100 million for education, she said softly. Sarah, you're not just successful. You're changing the world. That was always the plan, I replied. Success without purpose is just accumulation. I wanted to build something that mattered. As dinner wound down and my family began to leave, each of them stopped to hug me goodbye. Real hugs, not the perfunctory ones from before. Uncle Robert whispered, I'm proud of you, in my ear. Aunt Patricia promised to send me her revised business plan by Tuesday. Michael asked if I needed any legal work done for my foundation. My parents were the last to leave. As they gathered their coats, my mother turned back to me. Sarah, that intervention dinner was exactly what I needed, I finished. It reminded me why I was working so hard to build something different. We love you, my father said simply. We always have. We just didn't know how to show it properly. I know, Dad. And I love you too. All of you. After they left, I sat alone in my grandmother's dining room, surrounded by the ghosts of 100 family dinners. The chandelier cast the same warm glow, but everything else had changed. My phone showed 17 new messages from reporters wanting interviews about the university donation. 5 meeting requests from other philanthropists. 3 invitations to speak at conferences. But right now none of that mattered. Right now I was just Sarah Williamson sitting in my childhood chair, remembering the little girl who used to dream about building something that would make the world better. Mission accomplished, I thought, smiling as I turned off the lights and headed home. To whichever home I felt like sleeping in tonight. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's proving yourself right in ways they never imagined possible. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the people who underestimated you might just surprise you by becoming your biggest supporters. The next morning, I woke up in my downtown penthouse to find a text from Jennifer. Saw the news about the school. Mom's crying happy tears and Dad's bragging to everyone at the country club. You've made us all so proud. I smiled, looking out over the city I was helping to rebuild. Being understood was nice. But being proud of what I'd built? That was everything. The homeless intervention had worked, just not in the way my family had planned. It had reminded me that home wasn't about where you slept or what you owned. Home was about the people who loved you enough to worry about you, even when they were spectacularly wrong about what you needed. And now, finally, we were all on the same page.